and welcome to Lawfully Told, a podcast dedicating to examining the law through thoughtful conversations with individuals working within the justice system. I'm your host, Shirani Ranganatha, and I'm pleased to present today's episode. Our guest is Melanee Smith, an assistant United States attorney with extensive experience as both a state and federal prosecutor. Her professional background includes service in the Manhattan District Attorney Office, as well as her work as a federal prosecutor in Nevada. In this episode, we will discuss her path to a career in law, provide insight on the responsibilities of prosecutors, and offer guidance for students interested in pursuing a future in the legal profession. Before diving into the details about prosecution and courtroom work, I want to start with a personal story, how it all began, and how your experiences shaped your perspective. Looking back, most people don't start out knowing exactly what they want to do. What first made you curious about the law? Was there a moment in high school or college where you thought, I might want to do this?
That's a great question. So I wouldn't necessarily say in high school. In high school, I was always very involved in student government and those types of clubs and organizations. I never had a problem speaking in front of large groups. I never had that public speaking fear. Although I will point out, if you do have it in high school, don't think that that's going to hold you back from being a lawyer. But I think looking back now, having that perspective, I can see there was always that sort of undercurrent of this is what I was interested in, but it wasn't something where I thought, oh, I'm going to be a lawyer one day. I actually thought I was either going to be a doctor or work in politics. And I did go down that path very briefly when I started college, and neither really appealed to me once I got into the nitty gritty of it. But when I thought back, well, what kind of drew me to those professions? And the underlying theme, I think, was that I was eager to have a job that had a direct impact either on someone's life or the community. And so when I thought about that in combination with my skill set and the things I enjoyed doing, such as speaking to groups, arguing a point, taking a position, it kind of all then clicked. And I actually took 4 years off in between my undergrad and then going to law school. So by the time I started law school, I really knew not just that I wanted to be a lawyer, but that I wanted to be a prosecutor specifically. And I think everything had kind of built up to that point, all of my life experiences where I could give voice to victims, I could help make communities as safe as possible, have an impact there while utilizing what I felt my skill set was, which was advocating and speaking and critical thinking and logical thinking and all of that. And so for me, it was definitely more of a process. It wasn't a single moment or something that as a child, I just knew this is what I was going to do.
Yeah, that's a great perspective because many people start out differently and seeing how the common theme between most lawyers I've interviewed is that they get into law at a later period of time or they realize what they want to do at a later period of time. And essentially, public speaking isn't a direct correlation to being a lawyer, right?
No.
So that's a great way to put it.
No,
You're
and many people and many lawyers never actually get into the courtroom, never have
yeah,
to actually do that public speaking aspect. So I certainly don't want people to be turned off if that's not something they feel comfortable doing.
exactly. Exactly. Your path into prosecution took you several very different places and roles. You went from Arizona for undergrad to law school in Washington, D.C., to the Manhattan's DA office, and then to federal prosecution in Nevada. How did each step change the way you thought about the justice system or even public service?
Sure. So the way it kind of that path took up was I grew up in Arizona. I went to Arizona State mostly because I got free tuition. Financially, it made sense. And it's such a massive school that there's something for everyone. You could find a community there. And I ultimately did. And so when I was at Arizona State, I was more focused on political science and thinking I was going to get into politics. I worked on some campaigns. And that's what actually led me to Washington, D.C. I was given a job offer at the Sierra Club, which is an environmental justice organization. And I was working there. And at that time is when I really realized I wanted to go to law school. But like I said, I had taken 4 years off. So I was working full time, getting a paycheck, wasn't really ready to give that up. So I applied to schools in DC since that's where I was living. And I also applied to go, I went to law school at night actually, so that I could work full time during the day and still earn that paycheck and live in my apartment and all of that. So I went to law school at night. And when, like I said earlier, when I started law school, I knew what I wanted to do. And I would suggest if you're going to go to law school, have an idea. I think a lot of my classmates, I started law school in 2005, graduated in 2009. At that time, the economy had taken a nosedive. And so a lot of people had gone back to school or to law school not really knowing how they were going to apply it or what they wanted to do with their law degree. But law school is very expensive and you're going to have a lot of loan debt. So that's why I would suggest really knowing it's what you want to do, because it's going to be something you're paying off for a very long
Yeah.
time. Um, and then, so like I said, I knew I wanted to work at the Manhattan DA's office. I loved the big city. I loved the idea of living in New York. And the Manhattan DA's office was just, this sort of very well known. I mean, they make TV shows about it, right? And magically I ended up getting hired there out of law school, which was just an absolute dream come true. But to get back to your original question, what I noticed living in these different places and getting into criminal law and prosecution is it's very specific to the community you're living in, right? What makes sense in New York City, where people are all just kind of living on top of each other and they take the subway to get to work and you're all crammed into a car, versus what might be right for Las Vegas, Nevada, or Arizona, where people are much more spread out and they drive. You have to have different laws and different norms to approach those situations. And in a city like New York, where you have a lot of public housing, you have very upscale neighborhoods right next to maybe lower income neighborhoods, and the challenges that face those and how you work within that. And so the idea of justice or law in the criminal setting, there's a reason why criminal law tends to more be local. Like, yes, and we can talk about this later, we have the federal laws, and I'm a federal prosecutor now, but the vast majority of criminal prosecutions happen through the local DA's offices with that state's laws. Gun laws in New York are going to be different than gun laws in Nevada because you have a different environment. And you have, same with in New York, we have a lot of laws revolving around not paying for the subway, those kind. Well, we don't have subways so we don't have
Yeah.
those kind of, and so criminal law does tend to be very local, and for good reason, because every community has different needs and that kind of a thing. And so that was kind of the biggest thing that occurred to me, or that I learned as I was going through this. And what works as far as resolving a case or working with a defendant in New York is going to be different than in Nevada. And one of the things you hear a lot in criminal prosecution is an individualized assessment of the case. You really have to look at this. It's not a one size fits all. What's this person's background and history? What led them to this point where they're in this courtroom? Is this something that they people have tried to rehabilitate them over and over and it's just not working, and now we need to take more drastic measures? Or is this someone who this was a one-off, or this was out of character, and there are certain maybe other alternatives to maybe jail or whatever that would be appropriate? Because the ultimate goal is to make the community safer.
Mm.
And sometimes that means somebody needs to go to jail, and sometimes that sending someone to jail could actually make it worse, because if they get out of jail and they haven't developed any skills or any way to live in the community, if they're going to reoffend, you haven't really made the community safer, right? And so if that's the overall goal, then you have to look at the individual case to see what's going to actually in the long run get this person back on track to be a productive member of society.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I haven't really heard is that law school is really expensive. So I'm glad you touched on that. And
Yeah.
essentially about communities forming it's so different each place to place, like you stated. Like I'm sure Texas gun laws are completely different
Sure.
anywhere else, and seeing how communities can form in each and every area shows that a lawyer in, again, Nevada is can be different from a lawyer in New York. And it's glad to see that you were able to adapt from each time and place and different periods in your life too. Essentially touching on the TV aspect, many people see prosecutors on TV shows or in the news, but the real job is often very different from what it's portrayed. So let's start with the basics for listeners who may not be familiar with the role. Many people hear the word prosecutor but don't really know what it means. Can you explain what an assistant U.S. attorney does in a normal week and what the job really consists of?
Sure. So a prosecutor is the person. So when somebody commits a crime, they get arrested, and then the prosecutor takes the case. It's the prosecutor who ultimately decides what charges, if any, are appropriate. And then looking through what evidence exists, what evidence you might need to still gather to actually prove those charges. And then we file the charging document at the federal level as an assistant U.S. attorney. All felonies per the Constitution must be indicted by a grand jury. So you go in and you present the case to the grand jury, and it's been in the news a lot lately, but just very briefly, the grand jury just decides if there's probable cause to believe that this person committed this crime. It's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a very low standard. It's just probable cause. So, and then if the grand jury chooses to indict, the prosecutor files the indictment with the court and then goes from there and takes it through to sentencing. And it's their job to sort of prove ultimately beyond a reasonable doubt that this person committed this crime. And so we're the cops and the law enforcement investigate and gather the evidence, and then we're the ones who then present the evidence to the court, to a jury, that kind of a thing too, and work with the sentencing and all of that.
This is good information to know since there's so many roles, especially in court and in the judicial system and in general. So it's good to know what the prosecutor does and again, like the nitty-gritty of it. You've had experience on both sides of the prosecutorial system, state and federal, and you've worked as both a state prosecutor and a federal prosecutor. So what's the difference between state and federal cases, and how would a student know which path might interest them?
Sure. So a state prosecutor, so usually prosecutors' offices are at the county level.
Okay.
So your county is going to have a DA's office for that whole county. So in New York, what's strange, and generally one county will encompass many cities, right? New York City is slightly backwards. So New York City, for anyone who's familiar, has five boroughs: Manhattan,
Yeah.
Bronx, Brooklyn, Staten Island, and Queens. Each of those boroughs is its own county. So New York City actually has five DA's offices within one city. So it's slightly different. But at that level, at the county level, it's a much higher volume because you're dealing with everything from the lowest petty offenses up through the most serious, which are murder, your highest felonies, that kind of a thing. So it's a much higher caseload. It's much busier, but you work with the state laws and you work with the local police departments and that kind of a thing. And but the great thing about being at a DA's office, because it is busy, you're in court a lot. And it is such a great place to really cut your teeth because you want to start with the lowest level, low stakes, while you're still learning how to be a prosecutor and that kind of thing. So in the DA's office in Manhattan, for example, your first 2 years, all you handle are misdemeanors.
Mm.
The lower level offenses, and you really get a chance to, and you're in court nearly every day, which is it builds such important skills: how to think on your feet, how to argue on your feet. You're not always going to have time to go research some issue. You're going to just have to figure it out. And then starting after that, you get grand jury training and you go into learning how to present felony cases to the grand jury, that sort of a thing. And one of the big differences is at the state level or local level, the cops make a crime occurs, the cops make an arrest, and then they bring you the case. And then now you take what's there. At the federal level, we're not dealing so much with what we call the reactive cases, right? The cops make an arrest. You're dealing with investigations that are longer term. You're going after the higher level people, that kind of a thing. And so the prosecutor gets involved with the case from the beginning of the investigation. You're helping them gather the evidence. You're helping direct the direction of the investigation. So then when it comes ready to make an arrest or charge them, you already know everything. You've been gathering the evidence with the investigators along the way. It's a much more of a team effort and team situation. And again, we can only investigate crimes that fall under federal law. So under federal law, we don't even have jurisdiction over your everyday street crime, like most murders, things like that. We have jurisdiction over very specific sets of crimes and that kind of a thing. And an important thing when you're talking about what path students might think they will take, the federal government does not hire AUSAs for the most part right out of law school. You have to have 2-3 years of experience before you can even apply. So if you want to be a prosecutor, your path is going to be to go to the local office first, because when you get to the federal side, they want to make sure you already have that experience, right? You're not teaching somebody the basics of being a prosecutor because you have these much higher stakes, more intensive investigations. So I would say if somebody really wants to be a federal prosecutor, focus first on where you might want to get experience as a DA, put in your time there, and then move on to the federal government.
Yeah, to summarize, the state office is more of a starting out point, or if you really want to get into these reactive cases that really deal with the community, and then federal cases are when you have more experience and you deal with more trial-related, investigation-oriented type of cases. This is good to hear since both of these choices are so different but still impact the community in a way. It's such a good thing to hear and see. Prosecutors hold a lot of power, which I guess I'm sure also comes with responsibility. How do you balance the goal of winning a case with the obligation to do what's fair and ethical?
Sure. So, as the government, our number one responsibility is what we kind of say we wear the white hat, is to always be fair and ethical above anything, even winning a case, anything like that. And while I can only speak for myself, I do believe every prosecutor has that. Nobody wants to put an innocent person in jail. It is a massive fear. And so we're very meticulous to make sure that evidence proves that they did this. And we're always looking at, and there are some very hard decisions to make. And there are certainly times, and this occurs more when you're a DA than at the federal level, but when victims or victims' families really want to press forward with a case, and you have to tell them, we don't have the evidence, at least right now. We'll keep trying and we'll keep trying to develop it, but we ethically cannot bring a case if we don't believe we can prove it. And again, that's something that we take, an obligation we take very seriously. And so that's what I would say for that, is we put the ethics above
Mhm.
winning every day.
Exactly. And seeing how, again, it directly impacts the community and hard choices have to be done. I think in everyday life, hard choices need to be done. And so seeing how this directly affects the community again and how choices are substantial in this sort of profession is, again, a substantial and prominent thing that happens every single day. Um, Behind every case, there's real people and real consequences, and it focuses on the human impact of this prosecutor's work. Some cases leave a lasting impression long after they're over. Without getting into the confidential details, can you describe a case that stayed with you and explain why it mattered?
Sure. I've been thinking about this question a lot because we as prosecutors, we get this a lot. What's the craziest case?
Mm,
And it would be easy to go, certainly I've worked on homicides, I've worked on serious assaults, and those always stay with you. But I think for me, the case, it happened very early in my career. I was about a second or third year DA, and I had built a really good relationship with a detective. And he came to me about this was in Manhattan. There was a housing project where there was a drug dealer who was kind of running the project and kind of ruling by fear and all of that. And for years, they had been trying to investigate and get in there, and they were never able to. And finally, we were able to get into this organization, kind of infiltrate it with undercover detectives and some informants. And we spent about almost a year building this case up. We had, wiretaps, all of that. And we were eventually able to take them down. So, just a slight background in New York, when somebody calls the police about a crime or something that's happened, the dispatcher puts it out to the radio, the cops and the patrol cars. So, that's called a radio run. So in this particular housing project, the year before we did this investigation, they had had the highest number of radio runs for narcotics related activity. People weren't, the average resident there wasn't coming out. Kids weren't playing in the park because this drug organization had kind of taken control. When we took them down and we arrested them, we took the person supplying the drugs, the leader, and the members of the cell. The following year, that housing project had the lowest number of radio runs for narcotics activity. And the cops that patrolled that area said, you know what, the kids are out playing in the parks. The older folks are sitting on the stoop. It's back to being a vibrant community. And I remember, even though I didn't have a victim sitting in front of me or a family sitting in front of me, I felt like we had truly made an impact on this whole neighborhood and this whole community, and kind of given it back to the residents there to feel safe and feel like they could be out. And I'm glad that that success happened so early in my career, because it kind of really then was like, I'm in the right place. This is what I had hoped to accomplish when I became a prosecutor. So for me, I think it's maybe not the sexiest case. It doesn't have the gory details of some terrible crime, but for me, that had the biggest impact and has really stayed with me throughout my career.
This is so inspirational, seeing how it made a direct impact on that housing district and seeing how scary it is to kind of deal with the case of that sort of matter, and how I'm glad that it was solved. In that, again, like you said, that how kids are on the streets, I guess that's such a, like, it's such a dopamine effect, and that you feel happy about what you do, which is something that's really inspirational and great to hear. Again, touching on drug cases, especially involving fentanyl, this is a major issue right now in the youth. I know I'm hearing across the news, even in my community, about the fentanyl crisis that's happening right now. Nevada and many other states, like Texas, are also facing a serious fentanyl and drug crisis. How do prosecutors think about public safety, addiction, and accountability at the same time?
Yeah, it's a great topic, and it's a tricky one because you have your sort of street level addicts all the way up to the people who are flooding the streets with this product, right? And so it's a very multifaceted problem. And we always say you're not going to arrest your way out of it. So I will say more at the local level is where they're dealing with the actual addiction part of it, and trying to think through, we always say we don't want to criminalize addiction. It is a disease. And so you'll find most local courts, DA's offices have what we call like a drug treatment program, that kind of a thing. So that when they're truly at that sort of addict level, street level, they can go through sort of the drug treatment program, because ultimately it's going to be reducing the demand before the reality is the supply is infinite. It's coming, and then at the same time, more at like the federal level, what we're trying to do is go after the higher people who are running these distribution networks, going after the people who are importing it, who are start and dismantling those networks of the distribution and that kind of a thing. And then there's the education component. We go out as prosecutors and law enforcement, we go out into the community. I've gone out to schools all the way, unfortunately, starting as young as middle school up through high school, kind of educating kids on the dangers, the effects, not all fentanyl pills look the same. If you're at a party and somebody hands you something that maybe looks like a Xanax or a Tylenol, it could easily be a fentanyl pill. And the amount that it takes to cause someone to overdose is so minuscule. And so there's the education component as well, trying to get kids to understand the dangers and what it looks like and how to spot it, that kind of a thing. So it's a very multifaceted problem. So you're trying to deal with helping those who have become addicted, dealing with the addiction aspect to get them, moved away from that, educating the community, kids all the way up through adults, and then going after sort of your higher level, um, the networks that are putting it into the community. So, and it's something that there's no one answer. You're going to have to attack it, and it's going to take the whole community getting involved. I do think there has been a dent from when it was the peak of the crisis. I do think it's come down a little bit, and so it's just going to continue to be, I think, working through all of those different facets of it.
Definitely. And the education factor, especially, the more we can advocate to the youth that as much as like the tip of a pencil of fentanyl can essentially take someone's life is really great in the community. And especially, like you said, how prosecutors directly have an impact in deciding whether fentanyl cases, and how you said like the street level to the federal level is so important and distinguished in the community. The common word right now is community, which I'm seeing how your job is having an impact and how it impacts regular people and people that need to be prosecuted need to be in jail. You stated again how prosecutors rarely work alone, how they're always, especially federal ones, they're always working together. So, what role does teamwork and collaboration play when cases involve federal agents, local police, and investigators?
It's massive. I mean, teamwork is everything in this job. We don't do anything alone. We don't even do trials alone. You always have a trial partner. So, starting at the local level, you really build those relationships with the detectives, with the officers, kind of educating them on what we need them to do or what could tank a case. Like, if you're violating somebody's constitutional rights during a traffic stop, we're not going to be able to do anything with that case. So, from a practical side of things, please don't do that. But then also working together to build a case. Again, we don't carry guns. We don't go out and, they have to do it. So kind of maybe providing direction, like this is what we could really use to really get this case over the finish line or really prove up this element of this crime. At the federal level, it's even more of a collaboration, right? The agency, whether it's the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, whatever, will reach out to us early on in the investigation and say, hey, we're starting this investigation. We've got information that this is going on. We want to investigate it further. Can we get an AUSA assigned? And then the AUSA assigned will help get them the warrants, get them subpoenas. They'll have meetings about what the status is. If a case is, if you feel like you have the evidence to charge the case, if you don't. And so it's a constant. And so what's really important about that is being able to work in a team, being able to communicate with lots of different personalities, lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds, all of that. This is not a solo sport. This is a team sport, even within the office, right? Somebody might have a case where they're stuck or a question. We have a very open door policy. People are in and out of offices all day because, oh, I know my coworker has dealt with this issue before. Well, rather than reinvent the wheel, just go talk to that person, see what they did, and they're going to help you out. We're very, very collaborative. I found that both at the DA's office in Manhattan, here, and I think it's pretty universal. It's a very, very collaborative process. One of my coworkers who's been doing this much, much longer than me always reminds me that it's the practice of law, meaning it's always changing, it's always evolving, you're always learning, you've never mastered it. And so that's a huge, huge part of what goes on behind the scenes in these cases.
Yeah, like you said, it's a team sport, and I'm seeing so many different components, and I'm seeing the sort of checks and balances. Like you keep a check on the police officers, and the police officers balance it out with giving you information. So I'm seeing this like cohesive balance between both federal and prosecutors, and it's so inspiring and wonderful to hear how it's beautifully orchestrated and how things actually get happen. Moving on, many of our listeners are students who are curious about the law, but especially me, don't know where to begin. And we focus here about preparation in education. Your own education included both a large public university and a private law school. For high schoolers interested in law, what actually matters most when choosing a college or a major?
That is a great question, one I was very eager to address actually. When choosing a college, if you want to be a lawyer, you need to choose the college where you're going to be the happiest, where you're going to thrive. Because it I feel like especially in this social media world where there's a lot of competition or a lot of, oh, I have to keep up with this, you really don't.
Mm.
You don't want to pick a school simply because it has a brand name or because your friend is going there. You want to pick a school that you're going to be the happiest at, that you're going to thrive at. Because if you're unhappy, it's going to show up in your grades, it's going to show up in your lack of social interaction, it's going to show up. And for law and going to law school, what they really want to see are people who have gone out there and lived a life. They want to see people who can think critically, can think logically, can, draw on personal experiences and that kind of a thing. When I was at the DA's office, one of my coworkers grew up in the Bronx, went to Vassar, majored in English. I had another coworker who grew up in San Antonio, Texas, went to MIT, studied engineering, and then went to law school while she was in the Navy as an engineer. Another coworker who played D1 baseball, in North Carolina. We all ended up at the same place, all vastly different backgrounds. I think your major should be something that you are interested in, that you're going to actually want to pursue, continue. I don't want to say your major doesn't matter. It matters in the sense that it fulfills you and that it teaches you how to be a thinker. And the thing about law, I had a law professor who told us, there's a reason you never, when you hear about these kids who are geniuses and are graduating college at 12 or whatever, you never see them go on to become lawyers at the age of 15. They might become doctors because that's a very technical thing where you have to be able to memorize the bite. Law law isn't like that. It's a much more artful practice. You have to understand, you have to be able to really articulate yourself, represent your ideas both in writing and orally. And that comes with just life experience. So I would say choose a college where you're going to be happy, where it makes sense for you financially, where the location makes sense. Not everybody's ready to move across the country when they're 18 years old. And that's okay to go and stay close to home. Or some kids are super independent and can't wait to go out and burst into the world and go live in the big city. That's also okay. But look, if somebody is really adverse to big cities and the hustle and the bustle and it doesn't suit them, well, going to NYU is not going to be a good choice then, right? And so that's why when you're picking a college, I think the most important thing is that it's a college that suits you. That's what's going to serve you the best, not a particular major, not a particular name of a school, that kind of a thing. So that would be my advice for college. Me, I went to Arizona State, made sense financially. My tuition was paid for. Um, you know, it was such a big school, so it had all the things I could think of. The law school I picked again was based on location. I needed a school in the city I was currently living that had a night program, that kind of a thing. And so that's how I ended up at Catholic. Catholic is very well known for its securities law program and its communications law program, neither of which were of any interest to me. But I got a great education. The criminal law is fantastic. My criminal law professor asked me to be her TA the next year, and I got the job I ultimately wanted. And so I think you don't want your focus to be on, oh, I have to major in this. And then there's a million different paths to get there. What law schools want to see and what employers after law school want to see is that you are a hard worker, you can think critically, you can think logically, you can think freely, and that kind of a thing. And so that would be my advice for students trying to figure out where they're going to go to college.
It's refreshing to see that the factor that affects both all of us the most is how happy you are in a certain environment or a certain again environment. So seeing how that directly correlates to your pathway and seeing how essentially you can do whatever makes you happy and then go on to be a lawyer, which again goes into our main message of how you can be a lawyer doing whatever you want and being
Yeah.
as happy as you are. Um, Law requires, I'm sure, a mix of academic and real world skills. So, what skills should students start now if they think law might interest them, like writing, public speaking, STEM, or even summer activities?
Well, first, I would say yes to all of those things.
Okay.
Um, the more well rounded you are, I think the better lawyer you're going to be. So go take the cooking class, go do the semester abroad, go, to, whatever it is. I will say, though, writing is a big component of being a lawyer. And I have found as I've gone throughout my career, folks' writing skills have diminished over time in that it doesn't seem to be as much of a focus. And I don't want to be all like, old lady here, but I do think social media has impacted it a lot. The way people write on social media is very different than how you're going to write in a professional setting. Have being a good writer. So, like I was telling you, one of my coworkers has majored in English when she was at Vassar. I gave her all of my emotions to proofread, to look at, because she was just such a fantastic writer. And it's such a great skill to have. And I think so, really focusing on being able to express yourself through writing is crucial. And for now, at this stage, whether it's high school, college, write about whatever you want. I'm not saying you have to be a phenomenal legal writer. They're going to teach you the specific structure of how to write once you get to law school. Just but having that skill set of being able to write and express yourself through writing is such a critical skill. And so I would say start that now, whether it's your school essays, keeping a journal, whatever it might be, get in the habit of being able to express an idea properly through writing. Public speaking is an interesting one because it depends on what you want to do. It's not everybody who goes to law school or wants to be a lawyer wants to be a litigator or wants to be a trial lawyer. In fact, a very small percentage of lawyers are trial lawyers or litigators. So if that's something you're really into, again, this goes back to pursue what you like doing and what, don't try to force yourself into something if you don't really love it. That's going to come through when you're trying to do it. Um, so when you talk about public speaking, debate, history, STEM, summer activities, try all of those things, do all of those things, take the class that interests you. I would say at times definitely step out of your comfort zone, interact with people who look different than you, come from different neighborhoods than you, because when you get into the field of law, you are going back to the teamwork aspect. You're going to have to be able to really connect with people from all different backgrounds, right? If you go into criminal law and let's say you're a defense attorney, your clients are going to run the gamut, but you're going to have to build trust with every single one of them. And so you're going to really want to be able to develop that skill. As a prosecutor, our victims run the gamut, right? Unfortunately, reality is a lot of victims of crime come from these lower income neighborhoods. But when they walk in and see me in my suit and me looking, I need to still build that rapport with them and build trust that, hey, I'm going to advocate for you. I'm going to be your voice through this process. If you go into like corporate law or that kind of a thing, or sports law, let's say you're representing athletes, whatever the case may be, you're going to have to be able to build trust with all of these people. And to do that, you need experience interacting with as many different people as you can. And so I think that's an important thing too. And I think so going to what should you do now? Go do all the things, go try all the things and meet all the different kinds of people so that I think ultimately the more well-rounded you are and the more life experience you have is really what's going to serve you the most when you eventually become a lawyer.
Yes, absolutely. And throughout everyone I've interviewed and I've spoke with lawyers, writing is something that I've heard from every single person, which is something that's so important that's going to be used in every stage of your life, whether it be a law career or not. And we'll touch more on AI later, but seeing how AI is shaping our lives, and especially of my life as a high schooler, seeing how writing is still such an important factor that needs to be built in a skill that needs to be built is again good to hear and good to hear for the students that are listening. And going on to meeting new people, I know I can say that it's very intimidating as someone who's come from a background where it was a close community. I have my friends and stuff like that. So meeting new people, going beyond my comfort zone is something that I really need to work on and something that I feel our community also, my peers and our community also needs to work on, which is good and refreshing to hear. Um, Going on to the more intimidating factor about law school can feel intimidating from the outside. So, what surprised you most when you got to law school, and what did you wish you knew earlier?
Yeah. So when I got to law school, and again, I had a slightly different experience because I went at night, right? So I
Mm,
was slightly older than, but in the night section, we were all in that boat, right? We all had full-time jobs. We had all maybe taken a couple of years off from school before going. And so what I think my experience might have been slightly different than others because there were fewer of us and we were a very tight knit group. We didn't have that competition that you hear about in a lot of law school settings. We helped each other, we studied together, we were excited for each other when someone did well, that kind of a thing. Um, and so I actually loved law school. I had a great experience. Um, I would say so that actually surprised me because I had heard, oh, it's very competitive. And I think that depends on what school you go to. And again, that's something you want to look into when deciding what school you're going to go to. What is the environment like? What do other students say their experience was like? I think that's something very important to consider. One thing I wish I had known going into law school is this idea of being doing clerkships for judges. I think that would have been a great experience. And I didn't plan enough ahead to maybe think about interning for a judge while I was in law school or doing a clerkship the first year I got out. Again, that's going to really build your skills as a writer and as a researcher and that kind of a thing. Um, so that's something I wish I had known a little bit more about. Um, but other than that, I would say just have an open mind. Again, I knew what I thought I knew what I wanted to do, and ultimately it is. But let's say you go in thinking you want to do criminal law or you want to do social justice, whatever it may be. Keep an open mind as you take your classes. And if something else sort of strikes your fancy, don't be afraid to change your mind. I think a lot of people are like, well, I've already told everybody I'm going to do this, and they feel pressured to stay on that track. You don't have to. If you just realize once you actually get to doing the work that something else really interests you, then go do that. Um, I guess that's what my advice would be when again, I know I was intimidated by law school too, but once I got into it and was actually doing the work, I found I actually really enjoyed it. It wasn't as intimidating as I thought. It was a really great experience. And like I said, I have coworkers who didn't start law school until they were in their 40s and they did just fine. So, and then you have some who go straight through, right? They go to their 4 year undergrad and they start law school when they're 21, 22 years old and they did just fine. So whatever's right for you, it's gonna be okay. There's a lot of reading. There's the Socratic method, if you're not familiar, is what they use in most law schools. So the teacher doesn't wait for you to raise your hand. They're going to assume everyone's done the reading. They're going to assume everyone, and they just start calling on you when they have questions. And it's a very conversational style of teaching. So I wasn't familiar with the Socratic method before I started law school, but learned pretty quickly.
Mm.
So just that kind of a thing. But again, when you get to law school, you're gonna learn how to be a lawyer there. I wouldn't worry so much before starting law school that you have to know what it takes to be a lawyer. You just want to develop sort of those background skills, your writing, your social interactions, all critical thinking, all of that.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing, like in my school right now, we're doing Socratic seminars and all this sort of stuff. And additionally, writing skills about how clerks, I know I've heard all they do is briefs, just brief on top of brief. So that's good to hear. And again, the common theme I'm seeing is having an open mind, which is something that a lot of us youth need to implement. Since, like I've told you, since third grade, I've been like, okay, law, okay, Constitution. So I need to go out of my comfort zone essentially. Oh, I can take that computer science class. Oh, I can
Yeah.
take that biology class. And so additionally, these traits that really shape people as a well-rounded person is again a really prominent factor, I'm sure, of law school and law life and having a career in law. The legal profession is often, I feel, misunderstood, and the emotional side of work often does not really get discussed. And TV and movies is not, I'm sure, how you think about lawyers. So, law is often portrayed as something glamorous or dramatic. What's one myth about being a lawyer or a prosecutor that you'd love to correct?
It's a lot of behind the scenes. It's a lot of being in your office. It's a lot of reviewing uh, documents, researching the law. It's a lot of writing. It's, the more glamorous side where you see them in the courtroom and they're giving the big speech and all of that is a minuscule part. It's certainly at the federal level. Now you're in court a lot more as a DA, but again, it's a lot more behind the scenes. It's a lot more just in your office, nitty gritty, staying on top of paperwork, all of that kind of a thing. There is an emotional component, especially as a prosecutor. You see a lot of really hard things. So developing ways to compartmentalize that so it doesn't take over on your personal life side and you don't bring it home with you, that kind of a thing.
Mhm.
Um, I've never worked in corporate law. I've never been in-house counsel, that kind of thing. So I don't have as much background on that impact on them. But I would say and we don't sit around thinking about how we can put people in jail or anything like
Yeah.
that. It's a very as we've talked all along, it's a very cerebral exercise. And okay, I have this crime. It has four elements. What evidence do I have that proves each element? There's a lot of motion writing, and so that's a lot of legal research, finding the case law, and some of it's very esoteric and that kind of a thing. And so we're in our offices a lot, just going through I say paper, it's obviously all electronic now, but
Yeah.
going through that kind of a thing, it's when you're writing a search warrant, it can be very tedious, that kind of a stuff. So the exciting, glamorous part of being in the courtroom isn't nearly as big of a aspect of it as they maybe make on TV. Also, cases don't go to trial 5 minutes after an arrest is
Yeah.
made. I have a case that we're starting trial on March 23rd. The crimes occurred in 2017 and 2018. Now, that was a bigger case. It's a RICO case. So obviously that takes much longer to get to trial. But there's usually on average, it's about a year between the arrest and charging and the actual trial. And there's a lot that goes on. Discovery will is a huge component. So this, gathering all of the discovery, getting it turned over to the defense, redacting it. It's a very tedious exercise, and we have to review every document, every video, every, sitting and watching somebody give a statement for 4 hours. There's nothing glamorous about that, right? You're just, so that's kind of, I think, the side that maybe people don't see.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm currently in mock trial and I'm learning about disclosure and how the defense needs to know. While on TV, people would spring up a piece of evidence and be like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So I'm now learning like the certain things. And again, like you said, how trial happens such a later period of time. Right now, the court case that I've been particularly interested in is Miller v. Alabama. And basically, this court case involves a 14-year-old and he got convicted when he was 14, but then the case actually happened when he was 20, like he got into
Mm-hmm.
trial when he was 24. So a
Yeah.
whole so a whole 10-year period. And so seeing how this is so different from what we perceive it as is a great thing to hear, not only from you, but from other lawyers. And this is a great thing that you stated of how court life actually is, and it's nothing like what we perceive it as, which is again why I'm so glad to have this podcast so we can get into what really happens and not being sort of an intimidating factor.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm sure that the workplace can be intense and emotionally demanding. I know school and then law school and then undergrad, like I'm sure it's all very emotionally demanding. So how do you manage stress and stay grounded while working on serious cases?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I will say these environments that are stressful and that kind of a thing, it brings you together with your coworkers. Like we're a very tight-knit group because we're all going through this together. And when I was at the DA's office in particular, you're young, you're working 12, 14-hour days, and then you're going out for maybe a dinner or a cocktail after. And it brings you, so you have such an amazing support network at the office because you're all working in this stressful environment together. Outside of that, I would say have hobbies. I like to exercise a lot. I like to read a lot. And when people ask me, how do you separate out these horrible things that you see to people versus I personally am very good at compartmentalizing. I focus on the very technical aspect, what evidence do I have versus what were the emotions this person was going through when this happened. Um, that kind of a thing. Everyone develops their own techniques. We have a federal prosecutor in AUSA in San Diego that I met. She's a stand-up comedian in her free time. One of my coworkers, she has two very young kids. So her and her husband on the weekends, that's her time to just be with her family, take them out, that kind of a thing. And so it's like any job that has a lot of stress. Like imagine being an ER doctor, all that's very stressful. Being a cop is stressful. Um, you find the things that bring you joy and don't forget to incorporate those into your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Balance is such a huge aspect that I'm hearing about now, like having a balance between your extracurriculars and your social life, which I'm sure you've also had played a big part in having balance in your career, which is incredibly important. Another aspect that I feel is incredibly important is motivation. So, what keeps you motivated during these hard days?
Knowing the result, right? Thinking
Mm.
back to the impact I've had, remembering why you're doing this. And look, some days you're not motivated. Some days it's about discipline. It's just about getting through the work. And I think with any project that you have, and I developed this even when I was in high school, like let's say you have this massive essay you have to write and don't focus on the whole thing. Like, you know what? I'm just going to write the introduction. Let me just get through the introduction and then I'll step aside. Okay, now let me just write the first section. And so on the days when I have like a big motion or a lot of discovery to get through, I kind of break it up into smaller pieces. I'll set a timer for 30 minutes. Like, okay, for this 30 minutes, I'm just going to really focus on this one thing and do it. Because it can be hard when you have a lot of cases and you have a lot of work that needs to be done on each of them, trying to balance that time out. I like to do a lot of time blocking. And
Mm.
so I don't get distracted by emails. I have emails coming in nonstop all day. So I'll say, you know what, I'm going to set aside an hour 11 to 12 right before lunch. Then I'm going to focus on all of my emails. But I'm not going to, while I'm working on writing this motion response for this 1 hour, that's what I'm going to focus on. I'm not going to answer my phone. I'm not going to respond to an email, that kind of a thing. And so you really have to, for me, I'm a very organized person. So I've developed systems to do that. Some people work better in the chaos, right? They love it. They're answering emails, then they're going back to so you kind of just have to find what works for you. But and I know this is a very trendy thing to say right now, motivation isn't going to get you through. It's going to be discipline that's going to get you through. But overall, on the days when maybe you lost a trial, or maybe you had to dismiss a case, or maybe you couldn't find a witness, and if you then you just have to revert back to why you're doing this ultimately, and think about the impacts you have made and that kind of a thing to kind of sustain you through the really lower points.
Yeah, definitely. And seeing again how discipline outweighs motivation, but on those couple hard days where um things might not go according to plan, it's good to have motivation that'll power you through it. And I feel this especially relates to me since high school is a period of time where it's very stressful and discipline is something that will orient you while motivation will keep you going, which
Yeah.
is what I'm getting. One thing that I've really been curious about seeing as our time period, AI has been a really booming process and how it's taking the world up by storm. How do you think that AI is going to impact the legal field?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you first and foremost. I'm not as familiar with AI as
Mm.
maybe others because in the federal stuff, working for the federal government, we have blocks. We can't have
Yeah,
AI related programs on any of our computers or anything like that. Obviously, I've seen in the news private attorneys who have tried to submit motions and documents that were AI generated, and it did not go well for them. So, it's hard to predict because AI is constantly evolving and getting better and getting better. As it is right now, I certainly wouldn't recommend it. I've seen a lot of people,
yeah.
very publicly kind of fall on their face when they tried to use it. Um, but that being, as it evolves and gets better, I think it potentially could be a useful tool in the sense that it could help you weed through, like when you're trying to find support for your arguments and searching case law and searching, if it can do that with a level of accuracy, that might be a good tool, a good starting point. But you always have to go back and check it yourself, right? Like that's where I think people are getting in trouble is they're not actually checking that the cases say what AI said the cases said. And you always have to go back and put your own eyes on it, read it, do that work. So it'll be interesting to see as AI continues to evolve and get better and better if those are some of the, do I think we're ever going to get to a point where it's writing in our entire briefs or entire motions? I don't know. I don't know. That would be interesting. I kind of hope not, because
Yeah.
I think having the human element and making those arguments yourself is such an important component of the law, and applying your own life experiences and your own judgments to a situation, I think is such an important component that I hope it doesn't do that. If it can become a tool in helping you be a better researcher or maybe helping you word a sentence a certain way, that I can see, but I don't know. I'm interested to see how what the impact will, eventually has on our profession and every profession.
Yeah, I asked this question to every lawyer I interviewed just to see the scope of how AI is functioning and how it's taking over. And I've heard lawyers getting their bar license taken away because of how it's a scary place. And it's definitely scary to see how it has the potential to take jobs. But I'm glad to see now how much the law field is very human oriented,
Yeah,
unless some other fields like computer science, which is actively being AI taken over by AI. So that's essentially what I wanted to hear and kind of see. It doesn't have to be very like AI specific or knowledge specific, but it's good to hear that it's still a very human oriented field.
yeah,
To wrap up, I have a few quick questions to leave
sure.
students with some practical inspiration. So, is there a book or a podcast or a habit you'd recommend to students who are curious about the law?
Uh, that's a great question. I don't know that I have a specific one. I would say um anything that can help you write if you're not comfortable with this idea of stepping out of your comfort zone and meeting new people and doing that. There's lots of books out there. I'm reading a book right now, which I love by Vanessa Van Edwards. She's very prominent on social media. She's written a couple of books about how to really connect with people, that kind of a thing. So I would say follow that. As for the law itself, I don't have any specific. I tend to read
Mhm.
when in my free time, I actually try to tend to read books that are not related to the law and that kind of a thing, right? Because I feel like you need to have that separation in your life. Again, for me, it all goes back to go find your passions, go find your hobbies, be a well-rounded person. That's going to serve you the most when you ultimately get into being a lawyer.
Definitely. And I see Atomic Habits on your shelf right there. And
Yes.
I've currently checked that out and I'm excited to read it. And I think it's like essentially so fascinating how discipline and habits correlate each other. I know that's off topic, I'm sorry.
No,
But
but it does, right? And that's what we go back to. There's
yeah,
going to be days when you don't want to do anything, and it's going to come back to discipline. And
yeah,
so especially in high school. I think you guys have more pressure on you than ever before and more work on you than ever before. And so finding, utilizing the information that's out there to kind of figure out how to manage that without burning out
Yeah.
is, for me, that was something I didn't get to develop as much in high school. And so later in life, I kind of sought out, hey, what are some good tools for this? And so I kind of mix those in with my fun books.
Yeah, and it's good to have a diversified knowledge and I guess a book collection to again overall deepen your knowledge about things that not necessarily have to do about law, but also can be implemented. Finally, if you could give one message to a high school student who is curious about the law but unsure where to start, what would it be?
I would say, well, depending on what kind of law they want to do, what most people, I don't know if they realize, all of your courthouses are public. Everything that we do in the law is public. Go down and watch a court hearing. The Ninth Circuit, I was doing that oral argument, those are all online. They do all of them live, but they also record them. You can go pull them up, and it's on every topic that you have, criminal law to private practice, civil law, that kind of a thing. um, Reach out and maybe meet with somebody who's in law school. People are incredibly, for the most part, love to discuss with younger people what they do, what their path was. Go meet with someone, see if that's something you might be interested in, that kind of a thing. Don't rely on what you see on movies and TV. I don't think that's a good representation. But if you're interested, um, just send an email and to an office with DAs or something. All of our email addresses are usually online. Um, your local DA, that kind of thing. Sit down and talk with someone and see what their path was like and see if it's something that you would ultimately like to do and what their advice is and that kind of thing. That's what I suggest. I did that before I started law school. I wasn't sure. My sister-in-law's sister was a lawyer at the time. I went and had lunch with her and heard about her experience and her friends' experiences, and that was really helpful to me. So I would say just kind of go explore it a little bit, dip your toe in and see. And again, what I said earlier, always don't be afraid to change your mind. If
Yeah.
you want to do it and you get into college and you realize my passion lies somewhere else, then follow that. And it's never too late to hit reset. You can always get into the law at any point in your life.
Yes, absolutely. Seeing how being open-minded is so significant and so, I guess, like important in this field is something that'll always stick with me, and I hope with your listeners. And essentially, like you, how you said, everyone wants to discuss about their future and their career, and it's something that I've myself realized as I reach out to people. I just see how willing and how passionate lawyers are about what they do, and I hope this podcast is also a sort of a feature into what law life is actually like. So, to conclude, Melanee, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experiences and perspectives with us today. Your insights into prosecution, public service, professional development are greatly appreciated, particularly by the students who are beginning to explore careers in the legal field like me. And to our audience, thank you so much for listening to Lawfully Told. If you found this episode informative, we encourage you to follow the podcast for additional discussions with the legal professions who are making a meaningful contribution in the field. Until next time, we invite you to continue asking thoughtful questions and engaging with the law lawfully. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.